Hi, and welcome to the Great Campaigns of the American Civil War. My name is Patrick, and I'm hoping to use this, or I'm going to indulge myself in the opportunity to create a series of what I hope will be ongoing recordings that will act as sort of your introduction and guide to this fantastic gaming system for the American Civil War. I'm going to go through a series of lectures. I think I'm going to record, I don't know, maybe 15-20-minute segments, and each one will cover a variety of the different topics for some of the introductions and overviews of different concepts of the game. In this first one, I think I'm going to just go over some of the playing pieces, talk a little bit about the different maps, and a bit about the history of the game. I've been playing the game for about 7 years now. It was introduced to me, and I fell in love with it immediately. And I take every opportunity I can now at cons, and as I'm doing here with you, to introduce this to new players, because I think it is really a very rich system, and for what it is, being an operations level version of American Civil War battles, I think it rewards great tactical play, and it also gives you the opportunity to do some strategic thinking as far as how you move armies around. And I think it focuses a really good spotlight on what the battlefield commanders at the time had to endure, not only from command and control, but also with issues of terrain and mobility of large armies. So what can you expect from the system? Well, as I said, it is very rewarding. It's a little frustrating. A lot of people have problems with the fact that there is a great element of chance and randomness that occurs because it is based on a d6 or a six-sided die. And that plays a large part in the movement and the battles that you encounter throughout the system. But as I said, all luck can be mitigated, and if you're a good organizer and you can plan your moves accordingly, then you'll probably do well, and I think you'll enjoy the system very well. Before we get started in this, I'd like to point out a couple of resources online for you. One of which is where I kind of got my first introduction to this, and this is War Game Replays. And on there, this is run by Jay Myers, and he has a whole page, a sub-page, or a domain of it that is completely dedicated to the Great Campaign systems. And as you can see here, he has some tools that are available right online. The most important one is a good start here point with a tutorial, and I highly recommend, if you're going to get started with this, if you want to just kind of go back and have a reference, this is a terrific starting point. And much of the framework of these recordings are going to be just sort of a live action version of the concepts that he's introducing here. Tonight we're going to talk about these different markers and chits for your different units. And we'll probably talk a little bit about the map terrain, and if I feel that we can cover it in this first one, we'll get to some of the basic actions. But I'll probably forego that for another recording. So when you're done with watching this, before you move on, definitely go to visit the wargamereplays.com website and take a read through of this excellent tutorial. And there are some other resources on there that we will come back to a little bit later. But for now, let's get started. As you can see here, what I'm looking at is the very colorful and beautiful map from the current volume 8 of Battle Above the Clouds. This was released about 4 years ago, and it is, like I said, the current volume. There's another volume, volume 9, coming out, which is going to be a reprint of the very first title, Stonewall Jackson's Way. The entire Great Campaign system is the brainchild of Joe Balkowski, and it came out in 1992 with the first title, that being Stonewall Jackson's Way. And the system has actually been taken over just in the last 12 or 13 years by Ed Beach. And hello, Mr. Beach, if you're out there. But it actually has one of the most active player groups, from playtesting to online discussion groups to players that I've seen. It's probably the most active group I've seen on Consim World. There are often 2-year tournaments that go on. That's how I got my start in this. And so if you're ever at a loss for information, you can find resources right online or expert players that are willing to help out the newer players and answer questions. What we're going to look at first is just the basic playing pieces. As I said, I'm going to be using the Vassal module here. This was created by one of the current players, one of the big players, Rob Doan. Hi Rob, how you doing? And he has created a masterful module here, and a lot of the resources that you need to play this game are all right at your fingertips. So it makes playing this online quite easy. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to just take out a couple of pieces and just walk you through some of the markers that you'll see. Each game has specific aspects of it, but the current one, the Battle Above the Clouds, focuses around the campaign for Chattanooga and Chickamauga. A lot of the older titles obviously focus on Gettysburg or the Antietam and Maryland campaigns, the Overland Campaign in 1864, and a variety of other ones, Peninsula Campaign. This one was the first foray into the West, and it provides its own unique challenges. As you can see just from the extent of this map right here, you have, as a battlefield commander, not only the forces that you have to corral and maneuver, but you have all of these extreme terrain types, from mountains to woods to small creeks and middle-sized rivers to very large major rivers, the Tennessee River here, to ridges and hills, and just the basic open areas. The most important concept for maneuver in this game is to utilize the road networks that are printed on the map. And we'll talk about that in future discussions when it is time to talk about the actions and the movement of your forces. But first, let's go ahead and get started and just look at the basic playing pieces, just so the new player will have an understanding of what's involved here. Now, if you're playing this face-to-face, you actually see very large stacks. For example, Steedman stack here, when I expand it using the Vassal expander, you can see that I have quite a few pieces. If we were playing this face-to-face, you could have 8 to 10 pieces of cardboard all stacked on top of each other. So it can get a little unwieldy, and that's why I think it's great to play this on Vassal, because it handles all of this for you. So to new players, I can see how this could be, to see all of these different pieces and all of the different marker symbols can be a little daunting, but at its heart it's a very simple system, and once you start understanding what the different markers and symbols mean, like any game, it'll become second nature to you very quickly. The most basic pieces, obviously, you could see are the blue for the Union forces and the gray for the Confederates. Then you have a mixture of the different symbols here for the infantry to the cavalry here. So each side is going to have its own variety of infantry and cavalry units. And I'm going to spread out some of them here just so you can kind of get an idea of what's involved. I'm going to bring this one right up here, and I'm going to expand it. I'm going to drag it out so that you can get an idea of all the different pieces that are available here. First, we'll start with the individual designations for the different divisions or brigades that you'll see. In this case here, we have the name of it. Its commander is Palmer, and it belongs to the 21st Corps. And the black symbol there indicates that usually it has a leader associated with it. In this case here, Crittenden, you can see by his bar designation. I'm going to drag him up here as well. It designates him as the leader, so he is the actual Corps commander for all of the units in the 21st Corps. So when we talk about some of the leadership activations that you can do, it's important to notify or to figure out which one of these leaders are and which units are subordinate to them. So these are your two basic types of units here. I'm going to drag over a cavalry here just so you can see that as well. There's a cavalry leader and there's a cavalry unit. Every single unit is going to have not only its designation here with the actual division itself, but it will also have a manpower indication. So in this case here, we see it's got the American flag, and it's got 9 manpower. And in this particular series, the manpower represents about 500 men. So what we're looking at here is a division with about 4,500 soldiers that are battle ready. You can see that he is standing at, he is ready in the field. And when I flip it over here, you can see that they have an organized and a disorganized side. So at this case, it still indicates there's a 9 manpower there. But now his combat effectiveness has been reduced down to a 6. So he's acting about 66% as effective as a full battle-ready unit. So the goal here for this game is obviously you want to keep your units in prime battle condition, and you want to bring your forces to bear so that they can attack the enemy and hopefully inflict more losses and more damage on their units than they will to yours. So a division will be made up of the division designation or brigade and a manpower value. And throughout the day, as the units move through march or attacking, they're going to accumulate these fatigue markers. And the fatigue is what we would consider the basic currency of the game, because each unit has either a 0, no fatigue, or up to fatigue level 4. So as they march, they accumulate fatigue levels like that. And if they get into combat situations, it's a possibility that the result will indicate that they get completely and totally fatigued. And when a unit has reached fatigue level 4, it's completely done for the day. And it does not refresh until the next day. And even then, it doesn't completely refresh. It only loses 3 of these. So at the end of the day, when you recover, if a unit's at fatigue level 4, it's only going to recover down to fatigue level 1. So your optimal strategy for this, when you start using these, is you want to utilize the units as best as possible without getting them to the point where they're hard to recover for the next day. And that's the real challenge of this game. In addition to the corps commanders here, as you see with Crittenden, you also have the actual army commanders. In this case, it's Rosecrans. And Rosecrans and his counterpart on the Confederate side, Bragg, they have their use in the game, which is to help initiate a grand assault. And we'll talk a little bit more about that during the combat recording. But that's their primary function in the game, is to allow these corps commanders to expand the capability of their attacks so that they can actually bring more units from different hexes into play. Beyond that, that's essentially all they're good for. In some of the other titles, Grant, some of the others can do army activations where they can activate much larger swaths of divisions. But in this particular title here, unless you're in the campaign game, their function is specifically for the grand assaults. Some of the other markers that you'll see here are related to the individual division status. I'm going to just pull up some of them here. They are the flanks refused. That's used for preparing your battle to repel attacks from multiple flanks. So that's helpful depending on what your strategy is. Demoralized, it becomes if a unit is attacked in combat and it's defeated so soundly, normally they would just become disorganized and they'll have to retreat. But if the attack is so overwhelming, it's possible that the unit can be severely dealt a demoralizing result. In this case, it's possible they can go demoralized 1, or even worse, they can go to demoralized level 2. And that just indicates that it takes a much larger time for them to rally and recover over a period of multiple days. So that's kind of the result that you want the least if possible. Okay, let's see what else we have here. You could see some other terrain-based or defensive capabilities here. We have breastworks that can be constructed, and they can go all the way up to forts, which add a 2 or 3 multiplier. The fort gives you a 3 times multiplier. And there's even, in some of the titles, abatis works, where they've just cut down trees and thrown them up in a quick defensive formation. But breastworks really help your defensive capabilities, especially if you're defending a river crossing, as you see here. And the way this works is you place that on top of the particular division that is entrenched in the breastworks, and it is based on that particular one. So if you had multiple units in there, they don't all necessarily occupy the breastworks unless they've individually constructed them. let's talk a minute here. I'm going to hide the units. I'm going to give you a quick overview of the different terrain. As you can see here in northwest Georgia, near Chattanooga and Chickamauga, there is quite a variety of different terrains. Most of the terrain that's going to be involved with these particular scenarios is focused around here at Chickamauga Creek or the Chattanooga area, and I'm going to, with this particular scenario that I've set up, I'm on the southern end of the map, so there's not much room to move left and right, but I'll kind of pan around here a little bit for you. And you can see that there's a missionary ridge here, and there are cuts, there are river crossings that are vitally important, and there are swamps and provisional swamps. A lot of it is very high hill country, so you see some hash lines here that act as trails, and each one of these has a different movement cost. You see railroads come into a large part, especially during the campaign games when you're trying to establish supply depots and make sure that your armies are well fed and well provisioned for the battle ahead. So it is quite a challenge for any battlefield commander to not only negotiate the the combat against the other forces, but you have to be able to figure out what is the optimal way to get your forces maneuvered into position and prepared for an attack. If you try to do hasty attacks in this game, it's pretty unforgiving. So, as we'll see in some of the future recordings that specifically talk about the attacking and defending capabilities of these units, terrain plays a very large part in this game. So not only is it about maneuver, but it's also about navigating and overcoming some of the terrain obstacles that you're going to encounter. So I think this is probably a pretty good start. We've covered in this one the basic units. We've looked at infantry and the cavalry units for both Union and Confederate. You've seen a little bit about what the leaderships for the corps commanders look like and the army commanders, and some of the other basic markers in this game, the fatigue and some of the defensive breastworks and fortifications that you can use. I think in our next one we're going to talk about the concept of zones of control and some of the basic actions that you could take. And I hope you'll stick with this as we go through it. And each one of these will build on the previous recordings materials. So as you go on to the next one, be prepared to look at some a little more advanced topics. And you can always go back and watch this one again if you can stand to listen to my voice once again. So again, my name is Patrick, and I welcome you again to the Great Campaign System, and I look forward to having you along for the ride. And we will see you very soon at the next recording. As with any first-time recording, I did forget something, so I want to add this little addenda here. One of the important concepts of the individual divisions I forgot to go over were the two little numbers there on each of the playing pieces. The little one here in red and the smaller black one right next to it. I'll speak more in depth about these during the combat recording, but just to kind of give you a quick summary of what those represent. The first number here in the red is the leadership quality of that particular leader for the internal division leader. So Palmer's effectiveness in combat as a leader is a 2. You can see that varies here. Pegram's here is a 2. Wilder here is a 3. And typically, on the whole, your Confederate leaders, division leaders, are somewhat better. And you can see the actual individual leadership of the actual corps commanders is the same. So that number in red represents the leadership quality, and it's oftentimes more advantageous to get a leader stacked with your unit when you're making an attack, because his leadership here will supersede the actual division leadership. So whatever the highest leadership is inside the hex that's attacking or marching will be used as your modifier in the combat. And the second number here, the 4, each of the divisions has a representation of how many artillery batteries are contained with it. You can see with this reserve artillery, it actually has 3 full batteries with it, so it enhances the entire stack by having that many. So during combat, you're going to add up all those and look at the difference between the attacker and defender, and that's where you're going to come up with your artillery modifier. So sorry to forget that. That's a key important piece here for these different units. but we will touch on that much more in the next couple of recordings when we talk about combat.